Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And as if there wasn't enough going on inside the game, Wargaming just released a Sandbox test server which plans to test fundamental changes to one of the most controversial aspects of World of Tanks, self-propelled guns. In today's video I'm going to be letting you know everything there is to know about the Sandbox test server and seeing whether these changes, obviously in my opinion, might fix or even just be slightly nice changes to the controversial self-propelled gun class. So firstly, let me clarify, this is a Sandbox test server. This is a special test server that Wargaming put up where they can test out funky ideas, where they can build things up quickly and then they can break them all down, and then in theory any of the good outcomes from the Sandbox test server will go to a regular test server and then they'll be incorporated into the game. And what this means is there's no guarantee that any of these changes will happen if they prove to be immensely unpopular with the community. Alright, so firstly let's take a look to see what the plans for this Sandbox test are. Alright, firstly Wargaming clarify that all of the previously tested changes on the Sandbox test server, we're talking about the ammo changes, i.e. and also the health point changes. All of the tanks on the Sandbox test server right now have pretty much about 20% extra hit points. And also, all of the alpha damage of standard rounds has been increased by 20% as well to make up for that. But premium rounds, gold rounds, special rounds, whatever you want to call them, have the same alpha damage. So what this means is that regular rounds are going to become better than premium rounds if you can manage to penetrate with them, whereas the premium rounds still keep their heightened price and keep their heightened penetration to be used against thick armor. Whereas high explosive rounds have been absolutely murdered, in my opinion, where they no longer have extra high penetration and they can enter the enemy tank doing a whopping amount of damage, and now they just do consistent amounts of low damage, and even if they do penetrate, they're not really doing all that much. So, Wargaming argue that with all of these ammo changes and the health point changes, the self-propelled guns became completely irrelevant inside World of Tanks, which necessitates a proper rebalance. They also want to add gameplay variability for this vehicle type, because as it stands now, you just have one kind of ammunition and another kind of ammunition which actually is just better but costs more credits. It's a really boring, low interaction kind of class to play. Thirdly, they want to test decreasing the total duration of stuns that artillery will put out, and also decrease the damage share caused by self-propelled guns. Whoa, some pretty big changes here. Alright, so planned changes to self-propelled guns. Firstly, let's take a look at the standard shells. And that is that they've basically taken the damage values from the live server, but this doesn't consider the increase of health points that all of the vehicles will have. So what this means is that actually artillery will be doing 20% less effective damage because all of the tanks have 20% more health, but their shells will be still doing the same kind of damage that they did currently. Standard shells will also continue to stun the target. Now let's talk about special shells, gold shells, more expensive shells, whatever you want to call them. These high explosive shells that have increased damage per shot in comparison to standard shells. But apparently they're not going to be stunning anymore. They have a higher penetration value and a larger burst radius. Nominal damage per shot is increased by approximately 15% in comparison with standard shells. So if you load the gold, you're going to be pretty much doing 15% more damage at the expense of not stunning the target. And the percentage damage of these shells is supposed to be the same as the percentage caused by self-propelled guns on the live server. Then they're presenting what they call alternative shells. These shells have a high penetration value and significantly lower but predictable damage if the shell penetrates. Basically, they will be like armor-piercing shells, but a small share of them can be heat shells, and these shells will not stun. So this all seems a bit confusing, so why don't we just actually get on the Sandbox test server and take a look at these changes? And there's no way in hell that I'm going to grind up an entire self-propelled gun line for a video when the news article only just went out about an hour ago, so you're just going to have to take a look at the statistics of these guns. So let's take a look at the Object 261. 45mm of pen, 900 alpha on its standard shell, 45mm of pen on its premium round with 1035 alpha, and 304mm of pen and 470 on its alternative round. So these standard rounds are identical to the live server currently, but as I clarified, everybody's hit points are going to increase, and so they're effectively going to be doing about 20% less damage relatively. However, the premium rounds with their 1035 alpha damage, i.e. increasing the damage total by 15%, will keep up with the hit point increase, but they won't be stunning anymore. And the armor piercing rounds that this vehicle have with 304mm of penetration will be able to do consistent 470 damage if, of course, you penetrate. So if I go inside the store, I can actually show you how much all of these different rounds are going to cost. The alternative round costs 2,980 credits, while the regular high explosive round costs 1,980 credits, and the premium high explosive round costs a whopping 7,200 credits. And so if you were thinking that you could just dab that 2 key and get away with it, yeah, unless you're wanting to spend about 100,000 credits a game in a long-winded round, it's going to be very expensive to do so. But by inspecting the different rounds, we can actually see that the premium rounds have an increased burst radius of 10%, going from 10 meters splash up to 11 meters splash. And we can also see the maximum stun duration is up to 29 seconds on the regular rounds, which is currently the same as the live server. So to all intents and purposes, the regular rounds are the same. Everybody's hit points have increased, which actually means that they drop 20% of their overall damage effectively. The gold rounds are very expensive, but they'll allow you to keep up with the hit point increase, but you're no longer going to be stunning the target. And if you want to fire these alternative rounds, armor-piercing rounds on this tank, then you're going to have decent penetration for engaging your opponents. And your alpha damage, 470, with a rate of fire of 1.88. Let's be honest, boys, that's not really ever going to achieve very much. We're talking about 1,000 damage a minute or less that this tank will be doing if it penetrates it rounds. And if any of you played old school artillery, you'll know that you're probably only connecting and penning maybe 1 out of 2 of your shots. So back in the day when the rounds were doing 1,100 damage, that felt fairly significant. Now with 470, is doing 1,000 damage a minute really going to add up? Actually, it won't be 1,000 because, of course, you're going to bounce one of those. There's only going to be about like 500 damage a minute probably that you're going to be dealing with this vehicle effectively. Of course, this is going to make artillery so much more dangerous again in close quarters combat. And I think that was a fairly exciting thing. I don't know about all of you guys now, but it feels a bit boring to watch artillery play at the end of the game, unless you're on a really low amount of hit points and then you almost feel like they're never going to miss you. You don't really feel a threat from artillery, and they should be a threat at the end of the game. It was always an exciting part of World of Tanks, both when you're watching your artillery try and hold off an enemy vehicle, and also when you're trying to hunt down artillery yourself. So I think a return of these alternative rounds, as Wargaming like to call them on this tank, I actually quite like it. This might be a bit controversial, but I actually preferred old artillery to new artillery. Old artillery, they either penned you or they didn't. And when they started to fire armor-piercing rounds at you, let's say you're in your IS-7 or you're in your mouse. Sure, if they caught you ill-prepared and they timed a good shot and you didn't know where the enemy artillery was, it's quite likely they'll be able to go through you and wreck half of your hit points. However, when you knew when the enemy when you knew where the enemy artillery was, then you could start to angle your tank towards them. And while they did have a whopping amount of penetration, there was nothing more satisfying in a mouse than bouncing, what was it, the 2,200 or the 1,800 damage that a T-92 armor-piercing shell used to do. I honestly preferred it when artillery would just ricochet off me, or maybe they'd just take away a bunch of my hit points and then not stun me afterwards, because at least then I could still play, or I could really get myself into a position where I'd be perfectly safe from them. I could angle my armor around a corner, and then they couldn't splash me with the ridiculous splash radius that artillery high explosive rounds have. So, while these changes aren't going to fix what is the most annoying aspect of artillery for me, the fact that they don't even really need to hit you directly anymore and they're just going to consistently remove your hit points, it's definitely not going to fix the god-awful stun that's in the game as well. At least this is going to mean that artillery will, all in all, do 20% less damage than they already do now if they want to continue to stun you, and they're going to be doing similar amounts of damage as they do now without stunning you if they want to pay an expensive premium. I don't really understand now with the whole stunning and with the premium rounds on this tank, or these self-propelled guns, why they should cost so much more. I really don't think that 7,200 credits is a fair price to sacrifice the stun and only gain 10% extra splash radius and 15% damage. I think that most artillery are going to continue to fire regular rounds, but there are just going to be those situations where you're going to have to pay to win, so to say, to just ramp up your team's damage when stunning is not useful, or where you want to just have that extra splash radius and have the extra damage. Wargaming's expectations are that they want players to have a choice. You know what? I think that's a great change, Wargaming, and I also think that this you're implementing it in probably one of the most fair ways. You're giving them back armor-piercing rounds or a heat round on some specific vehicles, and actually making it a choice. If you're engaging a tank that maybe has about 200 millimeters of armor, and your high explosive rounds will do very little to them if you manage to hit them cleanly, but if you load that premium round, not the premium round, sorry, if you load that alternative round, as they're going to be calling them now, you load the AP, and then you're doing 500 damage to the target, that really is significant. They're not going to want to take that. And obviously, the advantage of artillery is they can deliver those rounds indirectly from the back of the map, which is a huge advantage in itself. And they can manage to support their allies' vision. So depending on the situation of the battle, players could possibly choose between the ability to stun enemies, cause more damage, or penetrate enemy armor. Well, I like this, but Wargaming, I still feel like you've got an ugly problem. And that is that if you want to cause more damage, it's pay to win. It really is. I don't see, with the changes that you're making, the need for those premium rounds, those gold rounds, to actually cost more. Feels like the loss of the stun should be enough to justify the extra damage that you're going to be dealing to your opponents. But also, do we really want to get into a state where everybody's just... Actually, you know what? Here's a thing. Even if the premium rounds just cost the same as the regular rounds and every single artillery only fired premium rounds or gold rounds, they'd effectively only be as good as they are now. It's just they wouldn't stun you at all. So this is a really interesting one. YouTube, I need your feedback here. Would you rather, as a non-artillery player, that the artillery's premium rounds cost the same as their regular rounds? Would you rather get hit by a standard artillery shell that stuns you, or a premium artillery shell that doesn't stun you but will do 15% more damage? What is the lesser of the two evils, or are they both awful and you don't think that Wargaming are really addressing the key problem with self-propelled guns now? I also like the idea that the player's performance using self-propelled guns will directly depend on the ability to choose a shell type that best suits the current game situation. Artillery used to be so beautiful. I used to actually love watching very good artillery replays where you could clearly see that the player was thinking about getting into a position and preparing that shell for that correct target at that correct time. I don't like the way that artillery has become this horrible class at the back, which is just absolutely zero brains. You're so unengaged with it, where you could eat dinner or just not even think about the class itself. And so all in all, I think this is really a win-win for most players. I think if you're a dedicated artillery player, if Wargaming make these changes, then your skill at playing the class should allow you to perform just as well, if not better, by making tactical uses of alternative ammo. And I think that if you're a player who absolutely hates artillery with all of their passion, then effectively with the hit point increases, then everybody's going to be taking 20% less damage from artillery if they still stun you. But if they choose to fire the premium rounds, then they're going to be doing the same kind of damage to you as they did previously, but they're just not going to be stunning you at all. And at least in my opinion, with the way that Wargaming have balanced out the amount of damage that the the alternative rounds do on the Sandbox test server, I really can't see this being game-breaking. Firing less than 2 rounds a minute with 470 alpha damage. To put this into perspective, a tank with 470 alpha damage, like the T110E5, on the Sandbox test server, has a 6 round a minute rate of fire. But of course, is it worth losing 66 or 70% of your damage per minute to be able to fire indirectly? Well, in some situations, yes. In other situations, no, not at all. And so, ladies and gents, boys and girls, while I'm the kind of person who usually has the opinion of it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I'm actually thinking that these changes could be quite good, both when I want to play self-propelled guns and also when I have to put up with getting hit by self-propelled guns. I also really enjoy the hit point increases, especially at low tier, and the idea that regular rounds are going to be more effective than ever if you're a skilled player and you're not just dabbing the 2 key and overcompensating for aim. The only Sandbox test server change that I really don't like are the high explosive changes in general. I really think it's unnecessary. I'm not sure many people ever had a problem with vehicles like the M4 or the KV2, or even just getting hit by high explosive rounds towards the top tier of World of Tanks. And so Wargaming, if you're listening, please reconsider just the high explosive changes, because everything else, in my opinion, on the Sandbox test server starting to look like it could be a really good future version of World of Tanks. But, ladies and gents, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know in the comments what your opinion is on the artillery changes on the Sandbox test server. And as the Sandbox is now starting to reach kind of what I feel is a final stage, what do you think overall about the ideas that Wargaming are presenting? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.